what do you think about the development or education for nomadic people?
I have my own dream ideas about education, especially focused on education for nomads. I think the nomad way of being is so different from the rest of the world, standard traditional education. Let me start over. I think for education for nomads and possibly for other rural peoples should be quite different from the way we usually do education. Education, as far as I can see, is focused on people who live in cities, urban centers. Of course, if people want to get an education, they have to go to the cities where the good schools are, or at least famous schools. I think for nomads and other rural peoples, education should be quite different. Rather than being focused on the kinds of topics and subjects that traditional education is focused on, nomad education should be focused on what nomads are interested in. So here's a short way of describing my dream educational. I'm doing everything all wrong. I had it nice and natural when we were talking about it earlier. Yeah. The simplest way to begin talking about education for nomads is to allow them to learn to read and write about the things that they already know and love. Let nomad education be focused on the things that are relevant to their lifestyle, to their occupation, to their way of being. Currently, the way we usually do education, it seems opposite to all those things. It's not relevant. A friend of mine who, no, let's give a different story. One day I was sitting talking with a man who is very much involved in education. He's the director of a very big and prestigious school in a certain country, and he was talking about how his school in the city had recently opened a branch school in so many other things are going through my mind here. I'm thinking about how can I say this in succinct chunks so that they can be broken off into Instagram shorts. So I'm gonna have to start again. I think nomad education should be completely different from standard educational models. Principal focus for nomad education should be to give them the opportunity to learn to read and write about things that they already know and love. The reality is that actually all peoples of the world are already really well educated. All people groups of the world, all languages of the world already have very intricate, detailed, and effective educational systems. They're already quite well educated. When we talk about literacy rates or pre-literate rates, however you want to phrase that, we're not talking about people who don't have an education. They have an education, they just don't know how to read and write about things. And so this is what brings me to the idea that ideal nomad education, or even education for people in rural environments, should be focused on teaching people to read and write about things that they already know and love. I was invited to a wedding in a rural nomadic environment. And as I approached the community gathered around for the wedding, a man introduced himself to me, and he asked me to introduce myself to him. And so we exchanged basic biodata. And he said, "So, Mr. Ron, what do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm an education consultant." And he said, "Well, we have no need of your services." He didn't want outsiders coming in and messing up with their people and their culture. And he knew that I was clearly an outsider. So he said, we have no need of your services here. I said, "Wow, I'm really glad actually to hear that you have no need of my educational services. Could you at least tell me what is it that has made education so successful in your area that you don't need me to come in as an education consultant?" And he said, "Well, I am sitting here in front of you as proof. I am the first educated doctor from this community." And I said, "Wow, this is wonderful. I am grateful to the Almighty that education is so successful that it has produced you as a prominent educated person from this community. You've gotten the success that you've desired. You're a doctor. Great. Are you the only one who's gotten this kind of benefit from the educational system here?" He said, "Well, no, of course not. We have my cousin over here. He's a pharmacist. My brother over here is in the police force. And this other cousin over here, he's in a gazetted officer in the government. And we have others." And other people were gathering around at that point, listening to this conversation between an outsider and a local man from the community. And so I said, "So is this it? Could you give me a list?" He said, No, we have many more." I said, "Why don't you all give me a list of the people who have gotten some great benefit from education in your community?" And so they made a list of around 20 names. And so then I said, "Okay, this is great. 20 people who have gotten the benefit of education, gotten these good jobs in different spheres. How many of them are working here in this community?" "Well, maybe just one or two. The others have gotten jobs in other locations outside the community." And I said, "Now tell me, in your education system with your 12 years of school education, did they teach you math?" He said, "Well, yes, of course they taught us math." I said, "Could you tell me what's the population of this community, this village?" And he said, "Well, we have around 2,000 people here, 2,000 families." And I said, "So out of those 2,000 families, you've given me a list of 20 people. Could you tell me what percent is the 20 out of 2,000? And there was a pause. He said, "Yeah, that's about 1%. I said, "What are the other 99% doing?" He says, "Well, they're going with their parents out into the jungle, into the forest areas with the cattle and livestock to take them for grazing." I said, "Sir, please tell me, all of you, men and women here, could you tell me, out of your 12 years of school education, how many lessons do you remember that are relevant to what those 99% kids are doing? Agriculture, forestry, forest topics, animal topics, animal husbandry topics." They couldn't remember any. Their school system was completely irrelevant to the 99% of their own community by their own estimates. And only 1% of all the people who started education, he said everybody is starting education, but now none. I asked him, "Where did your parents and grandparents learn about taking care of the animals and grazing them in the jungle areas?" And they said, "Well, they learned it from their parents, who learned it from their parents, who learned it from their parents." I said, "So these kids who have grown up with school education, have they had the opportunity to learn from their parents about taking care of the animals in the forest and taking them out for grazing? No. So these kids have been raised in school education that has taught them nothing about what they're currently doing. 99% of the kids going through your school system, 99% of them are getting an education that they can't use. And they all agreed. And then he said, Mr. Ron, could you come and be an education consultant for our community? I was in another conversation with a man who is very prominent in education for that region, the northern region of the country that they're living in. And he's from one of the dominant ethnic groups in his region. People who are very well educated. Many of the people of this dominant language group are very well educated. And so this man comes from that community, and he's now the director of a school which was originally started by missionaries in some decades before, actually about 100 years before. He's the president of the school now, and has been for quite a few years. He and I got into this conversation, and he said, okay, Mr. Ron, as an education consultant, what advice would you give us? What kind of education consultation do you give even to the people in the rural areas? And I said, honestly, sir, forgive me for being so brash and blunt, but I would advise people in the rural areas and for the nomads to never set foot even one day in your school. He said, okay, you've gotten my attention. Why would you say that? And I said, sir, I've done casual surveys all over this state of this country, and I've asked a lot of people questions about what kind of benefit they get out of the school. And what they tell me is that on average, of all those who start school education, only about 2%. A lot of times, usually it's actually closer to 1%. But I would say, knowing your school, which has got a very good English medium program, I would say your teachers probably speak good English. But in the majority of the schools that I've surveyed, the medium of education is English. And when I interview the teachers and even the heads of the school, nobody speaks English. They don't actually speak or understand English very clearly. If the teachers don't know English, how can they really teach in English? All the textbooks, all the school books that the kids are learning from are in English. But I've interviewed several teachers, and they themselves don't understand the material in even the lower grades of school, the lower classes, 1st through 5th. So if the teachers don't know good English, how can they teach the kids in English, let alone teaching them English? It's a struggle. It's a great struggle. And I want to be careful. There are a lot of people who get good English, but let's say even in a country like India, you've got 1 billion people. If even 1% get the good benefit of learning English, that's a lot of people. The problem is there's 99% of the population, or at the best 98% of the population, who are not learning English. Mm-hmm. And if they don't learn English, how can they really understand the material that they're being taught? So by the 5th or 6th class or grade, people drop out of the school. I was talking with some people from a particular village in a district of the state that actually has a high education rate. And one of the most educated villages in this particular district, which has produced people who are very literate, not only literate, but they're authors. They've become famous in their departments, whether in literacy, in education, in literary fields, writers, and radio broadcasters come from this particular village or group of villages. So I was talking with a man who is the head of a very prominent school in his particular area, and he came to know that I am an education consultant, and so he said, "Mr. Ron, what kind of advice would you give students in our area?" And I said, "Well, sir, pardon me for being so bold, blunt, but I would tell people not to step foot in your school." He said, "Okay, you've gotten my attention. Why would you tell them that?" I said, "Well, sir, your school is very good. It's one of the best. It's definitely the best. It's the top school. Everybody recognizes your school is the top school in this region. But it caters to wealthy kids, urban kids, kids who have parents and others who can talk to them in English. And your school is an English medium school. But the people that I walk with, the nomads and other people in rural environments, they don't have those facilities. They don't have people in their village that can speak English. Your teachers speak good English. So I would say your stats are probably better than I found in the rest of the state, where in most schools that I visit, only about 1% of kids who start school actually finish. And even with a testing and exam system that favors rural people, it favors them by giving them a passing grade if they get 30% correct on their exams. I think that's kids who get passing grades if they get only 30%. And so those kids pass along, but by the time, most of them don't make it all the way to 12th class or 12th grade. They end up dropping out. So a small percentage of the kids actually make it to 12th grade. And most kids, almost all the kids, what are they going to school for? Their purpose is to be able to get a university and then get a job. So just a small percentage of kids who go to school make it to 12th class. In one school, one of the best schools, one of the best villages in one of the best districts for education for this nomadic group, they're only seeing about 10% make it to 12th class. And then about 1% make it all the way to a university and actually get a job. Less than 1%. What are the other 99% doing? They're doing agricultural work, or they're doing animal husbandry work. They're nomads with taking the herds up into the high mountains for summer pastures. They haven't had an opportunity to learn those skills needed for that occupation because they've spent all their time in the school system. That's why I would advise them not to bother sending their kids to school. In another story, I was out in an area just outside of a city, and it's bordering on a neighborhood that does have a reasonably decent school. But I met some nomadic shepherd kids, ranging in age from age about 6 up to about age 11. There were about a dozen or so kids. And I just started asking those kids in their language if they'd ever been to school. And they all said no. I said, "Have you ever been to school even one day?" They said no. "No, sir, we have never been to school, not even one day." "Have you ever been inside, have you ever met a teacher, be able to greet a teacher, somebody who can teach in any language?" They said no. "No, sir, we've never even met a teacher." I said, "So tell me," I pointed to a bush. It was just beside us, and I said, "What's the name of this bush?" And they told me. the name of that bush. What do you call this over here? They gave me the name of that particular herbal plant. And I said, so what's the name of that tree over there? And they told me the name of that tree. Anything that I pointed to, they could tell me the name of that. Not just that it's a tree, but what specific species of tree that was. And I said, what is this good for? And they said they could tell me that, well, if our sheep has a bloated stomach, then we make something with this herb and feed it to the sheep, and she gets better. If we have a horse with an injured leg, then we take the roots from this and we fry it together with some oil, and we put it on the injury of the horse's leg, and it gets better. And they said, oh, this one over here is not good. This is a poisonous plant, but this plant over here on the other side, this is the antidote for that poison. So before, when the horse gets sick from eating the wrong plant, then we bring it over here, and we can make the horse well again. This plant over here, the goats can eat it, but the sheep cannot eat it. This one over here is very, very healthy for all the animals to eat. So they knew all these things, all about their environment, without a day spent with a teacher. I would say these kids were very well educated. I was in another situation with some shepherd people high up in the Himalayas. And we were standing in an area right about the tree line at around 11,000 feet of elevation. And met these shepherds, and they had some shawls and some sheets spread out on the grass, and they were drying some vegetable products, and some of those products were mixed with a cheese ball kind of thing. And so I asked them, okay, what are these things, and where did you get them? So, well, these are wild vegetable parts that we mix with the cheese that we make from, some of these things we mix with the cheese that we make from our goat's milk. And then we take all these different herbal plants, and these over here we use for medicines, and these over here we use for vegetables. And I said, where did you get them? And he pointed to the higher peaks, much higher than where we were standing, at an elevation of around 14,000 feet. And they said, well, we get these vegetables and these herbs from up there. And some of them we get from down here at this elevation. And then we pull them together and we dry them and we take them and we use them during the winter months in our low elevation pastures. I was describing that to a man who was the head of a department called agroforestology, studying and researching the usage of natural plants and herbs in the forest. And the director of that department, when he heard me tell this story, he said, oh, you are reminding me of things that my illiterate, uneducated mother told me when I was a little boy. These are not things that I learned in the state level university. You just reminded me of those things that I learned when I was a little boy.